Piera Geraldi. We are very happy to welcome you at the DMEXCO TV studio. Nice that you are here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Could you kindly tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you are doing?
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder and executive creative director of Refinery 29, which is a media company that is all about celebrating women and helping them to claim their power in the work that they do. So we put out all different kinds of content and storytelling across experiential, across digital content, as well as film and television.
Okay, so do you have some stories you can share with us what Refinery 29 did at the past to get a feeling for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched the company almost 15 years ago, so we were really digital media pioneers at the time. There was no roadmap to do what we were doing, but our goal was to really shift the way that women are represented and spoken to in media and advertising. We wanted to really present women in all of their strength, individuality, complexity, and to celebrate them as they are versus the traditional media model, which really was, a lot of the content was designed to make women feel bad about themselves, to feel less than, to feel like they had to fit into this very narrow ideal of what was beautiful or what success looked like. So we've really worked to expand that lens and speak to women in a way that's conversational, and most importantly, to really share their voices and their perspectives versus just talking to an audience or talking at an audience, which also was the kind of traditional approach, like this voice of God talking to and at someone versus actually having a conversation and leaving space for them to make up their own mind. So in doing that, we really tapped into sort of this millennial mindset. So early on, we were focusing on the next generation of women, how we could create content for them. And the way that we were speaking to them was just so much more authentic and relatable. And we also really focused on diversity and inclusivity in our content, wanting to make sure that a lot of people who had been excluded from the narrative and from the visual landscape would be included. And so by doing that, we created a lot of trust with a very large audience. So we now speak to 250 million women, and we have offices in New York, LA, Toronto, Berlin, and London.
Do you think a lot of companies have already understood since you started that they need to become more sensitive about the way they approach an audience? Like you mentioned, women in advertising were always like the pretty face, and so do you think this message has been received by most enterprises, or?
I think there's a growing and heightened awareness of the need to think about inclusivity on all levels and to shift the way we represent women, but I don't think the message has been received exactly, because I think when we look at the numbers and we look at the number of speaking parts that women have in films, the number of women filmmakers, the number of women CEOs, all of those numbers are still very low. So I think there's definitely a growing awareness, and we've seen sort of what Refinery was doing, 15 years ago and 10 years ago that still felt very, provocative is now becoming more accepted and more copied in a lot of ways, in a good way. Like we want to see that change, obviously, and that's our whole mission. But we still have a long way to go, and I think that message needs to be received more deeply. And I still think a lot of people, when they hear 50-50 or they hear about women's empowerment, they think, they kind of do an eye roll, or they think it's like a handout when they don't. What they don't realize is that actually, that if they don't do it, their business will fail and they will not be set up for the future, because the world is changing, culture is changing. The younger generations are the most multicultural generation. Women are, coming into their power, and women control the majority of the spending power. And I think we're starting to see that actually we want to spend our money in ways that reinforce our ideals and that are supportive back to us. So the message is more visible, but I am looking forward to it being received more deeply and seeing more meaningful change that actually benefits everyone. Because that's the thing, is women's empowerment isn't just about the benefit of women, it's actually better for men as well and for the whole of the world. And when we fund women's businesses, we're going to see this huge rise in innovation, because when you think about that gap between the fact that women will control 75% of global spending power by 2028, and yet only 2.2% of venture money goes to women-run businesses, like that's a depressing gap, but it's also a huge opportunity, because that is this untapped resource of incredible innovation and products that frankly a man would never think of because they don't represent their daily experience.
Yeah. So I always have the feeling that America's already a lot more, like American women, they are more proud of being a female entrepreneur and stuff like that. In Germany, it's sometimes I get the feeling that a lot of people are like, hey, I want to be a female manager, but be like a man.
Right.
What would you recommend based on your experience? You work with so many inspiring people. What do you recommend German women to do in order to set up like an empowerment movement here in Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough thing. I mean, even in the US, it's like we've been taught what leadership looks like, which is based on an old mold and a very male-centric mold. And so it's hard. I mean, even when I was coming into my own, building our company, and we started so small, it wasn't until like 5 years in that I started to feel like, oh wow, you know, I'm all of a sudden I'm kind of a big deal. I need to be, you know, a leader. And then when I had to step into those executive meetings, those, you know, presentations, I did look to male leadership styles for how I should be, because that was the only sort of role model or the only template that was placed for me. And it was over time that I realized that I could bring my own self to the table, and that I could model new types of leadership that value things that are seen as more traditional feminine values, but that actually in a lot of studies have shown to be very effective. So I think when I think about, you know, when I talk to other leaders, I often talk about, you know, men or women, because again, like I think these old ways, like they don't actually benefit either sex. But I often talk about, you know, leaning into your own power and your own style and working to develop your own style and strengths, because that's what's really authentic, and that's where you're going to see the most success, if you can kind of leverage your strengths as you go into new territory or uncomfortable territory. And an example of that I think about is when I first started to have to negotiate a lot at my job. I thought I had to be like very hard, very tough. And then I realized that I could actually negotiate very effectively by leveraging my storytelling abilities, my creative ability to paint a beautiful vision that people wanted to be inside of. And then that I could use collaboration and, you know, collaboration skills to be human to human with the other person, but to get to a point, you know, where we were both happy. And, you know, realizing that was so empowering to me, because it just unlocked all these other areas where I thought, oh, I can't do that because I'm not like that. And then I realized, no, you can find the way to use your strengths to go into these areas that might feel very uncomfortable or unusual.
Yeah, so instead of trying to being the copycat of someone, being authentic, and most probably you are anyway the best when you are just being yourself.
Yeah, and I mean everyone really is, but we feel like we have to, you know, because a lot in culture is set up to compare and is, you know, kind of built on that versus like competition.
Yes.
But when you actually focus more on yourself and what your strengths are, you can build upon that and be much more effective than just trying to copy someone else, because that's the way you do it.
Yeah, I fully agree. So you talked on stage about resistance. Could you share us a little bit of the insights about the power of resistance?
Yeah, so my talk was called The Path of Most Resistance, because in English, and I know there's a comparable expression in German, but we're told to take the path of least resistance. So essentially that we should look for the solution that's easy, that's proven, that's efficient. So my talk was all about how actually when you push through resistance, both societal resistance and personal resistance, you can unlock so much more opportunity and innovation and growth. And so in the talk, I was talking about the personal resistance that we face, which is how our brains are wired, our fight or flight response to something that we perceive as danger. And so we all have this, fear of failure, fear of change because of sort of our primal brain. But to push through that helps us to uncover a lot more opportunity. Then I also was talking about societal resistance, so how basically our stereotypes, our biases, and the status quo, like how things should be done, how those often tell us like, oh no, back away, that's, it's our pack mentality keeps us from wanting to step away from the pack and do something new. So in both of those cases, with our company and with my own career personally, I've found that when I feel resistance is when I get very interested and where, I try and see if there's actually a lot of opportunity there. And for them, in my experience, that's always where the most opportunity is the places where other people were afraid to go because either their personal resistance or that societal resistance made them afraid to even touch that topic.
Okay, so always better to create your own trail instead of following the flow. And
and also in my talk I talk about some ways that you can push yourself to do that because we do have this natural feeling of wanting to like go run the other direction.
Fit in. And
I think often when you kind of do it as a group, so when you think about how you can bring other people to the table who can help to fill, your blind spots, and also then you feel like you're doing it for, when you kind of feel like you're doing it for someone else, for the good of someone else, it gives you sort of the courage to push through. And then, I also think that you have to practice it. It's truly, resistance is a practice, so it's a daily practice of every day asking yourself if you've pushed through resistance, if you've challenged yourself. Because you have to practice taking risks to feel comfortable with taking a big risk.
So starting with small risk in order to feel prepared for the big ones.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So when we talk about diversity, in Germany it's a big discussion about a quota for women in leadership and stuff like that. So do you think diversity can, in general, help companies in order to succeed in terms of digital transformation, like moving into the new era?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, both having, equal 50-50 women and men, but also thinking about larger diversity. Do you have immigrants on your team? Do you have people of color on your team? Do you have, queer people on your team? Like really thinking about especially when you think about if you're trying to reach a diverse audience, if you're trying to have your product appeal to women or appeal to a certain age group even, I think it's important to think about how are you bringing those people to the table in the creative process, in the decision-making process, in the strategy process to make sure that you're authentically connecting and that you're finding this new opportunity and this new ground in a way. And for us, that's what's been really, really successful. But I think it's so critical. I mean, it was like what I was saying before with the fact that the younger generations are the most multicultural, they're the most diverse, and the culture is just changing. So I think that like that stat that I said before where the gap between women's spending power and the actual money that women are given to fund their businesses is just so massive. And again, it's a huge opportunity for businesses to innovate, to reach new market share, to actually build trust and enthusiasm with a different consumer when you bring women to the table, when you bring diversity onto your team. That's what's going to make your business win. And I think people that don't do it are going to be totally left behind. But it's also important for digital transformation because I think it's, I don't know, I see so many companies fail with digital transformation because they're so stuck in their ways and they just want to they want to go digital, but they don't actually want to really understand the audience and really understand the behaviors and to shift how they work to fit those needs. Like they hold like a bias or a judgment around what's good or what's not good or what is valuable not versus not valuable. And that keeps them from actually innovating and reaching new people and having their digital transformation succeed.
Okay, so basically it's embracing change and also diversity.
Yes,
Of,
absolutely.
future success.
Yes, so
Great.
necessary.
Great. Piera, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
the nice
much.
talks and sharing all those insights.
Absolutely.
Enjoy DMEXCO and
I will.
empower women. Continue.
Thank you.